I love listening to Breen and Mark Jackson and this guy. It is just a great listen. It's a lot of fun. I become smarter. And boy, do I love it when he just absolutely lays into floppers, because that is the way I feel as well. On the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line, the great Jeff Van Gundy of the worldwide leader in sports joining us now from the East Coast. How you doing, Jeff?
Doing well. How's everything?
I'm better for talking to you. Thank you so much for joining on a busy day and obviously busy travel schedule. What do you think of Game 5? What's your impressions now that we're a few hours removed from it, Jeff?
Well, I think for the Warriors to win a game where Curry, shot the ball so poorly, and to win and win easily down the stretch is remarkable. I think the last two wins by the Warriors have been, with their roster composition, as remarkable as I remember. I just so impressed with how they've played and how they've figured out ways to win, really hard-fought games. And I thought Boston was the better, more talented team from the start. And right now I look very wrong.
Well, I mean, you could still be right. It just seems that there's too many turnovers again. And we saw that again last night from Boston. How does one fix that? Obviously, Coach Udoka knows what's up and has been very straightforward with his team. But how does one fix such an issue?
Well, if you want low turnover games, you're going to have to be intelligent in the way you attack the defense, and you're going to have to make sure that you're eliminating the home run plays and the lack of fundamental plays, because there's going to be mistakes in the game, and you're going to have some turnovers, but you got to try to eliminate the fundamental ones of playing in a crowd, and then the home run passing plays are really problematic because they lead to steals and then open court situations. And to me, that's where, Boston has a lot of answers for the Warriors in the half court, but in the full court, in the open court, they just have such good shooting and skill. It's going to be hard for them to get those type of stops. So right now for Boston, their best defense is a really sound offense, and they just haven't been able to limit their turnovers enough to keep themselves to win in these last two. And the two games they've won in the series, they've had 12 turnovers, and the other three, they've had high turnovers.
Jeff Van Gundy joining us here post Game 5 on the Rich Eisen Show. And Wiggins has become a revelation. And the fact that his presence there, interestingly enough, can be traced back to the sign and trade away of Durant, and now he's providing that fourth wheel. Obviously, nobody's Durant; he's a unicorn in himself. But with Curry and Clay now back in the mix, and Draymond, Wiggins is providing that crucial fourth wheel for this team. Certainly over the last two games. I'm wondering what you've seen from your seat, Jeff.
Well, he's been their best wing defender, and he didn't make jump shots last night. He missed all 6 threes, I believe, but he is attacking the basket, and he's being opportunistic offensively, playing off the skill level of the other players, and defensively, he's really done a fantastic job. And the hardest part for players like Wiggins is to find a level of consistency that you can do this night after night. So I felt like after Wiggins played a terrific Game 4, he may be in for a lesser performance in Game 5. But he answered the bell, and he played, he was the best Warrior on the floor. It wasn't even close. And in this series, he's been the second best Warrior player, and that hasn't been close. So it looks like a terrific trade. And because of Wiggins and Curry, they're primed to be in position to win a championship.
So you have a front row seat to what appears to be, look, it's intense, and all NBA finals are, this just in, but there seems to be a lot of chirping towards the officiating, and you've got a front row seat, and the Celtics last night seemed to lose their focus. There's no question about it in the fourth quarter. Am I picking up something from sitting on the couch that doesn't exist? But what can you tell me, Jeff?
Well, I really do think that the officiating, first of all, I have no problem with people scrutinizing officiating. They're out there, just like the teams. They have a huge impact on who wins and who loses. They're all highly compensated. They're the tops in their profession. So I think it's fair game to scrutinize them. But I do believe that teams and our league as a whole have allowed far too much confrontational and aggressive conversations. I do not remember walking onto the court and holding a conference at midcourt time after time. It's happening almost every time out. And I think for the Celtics last night, I think what they have to do is really ask themselves, does our constant complaining, discussion, however you want to term it, does it give ourselves our best chance to play our best game? And some guys can play very well running their mouth to the officials. Other guys can be distracted very easily. And so I think it's incumbent on the Celtics to really look at how their behavior is impacting their performance. In their eyes, maybe it isn't at all. Or maybe, as they study it, it's had an unnecessary negative impact on how they've played. But there's no doubt that you're picking up on something that's almost impossible to avoid. The every play complaints, the histrionics of throwing your arms up on every non-call, and I think it's a bad look for the NBA as a whole.
Well, I mean, and then sometimes when you do it all the time, it takes away from the moments where you're actually right. So
Rich, I agree with that, and it's the same thing. And you mentioned flopping.
Yeah,
it's why I have no sympathy when floppers actually don't flop and don't get the benefit of the doubt. Because if I'm a referee and you're trying to trick me instead of play the game, I am going to be very leery of any contact because I know you're a known exaggerator, and you're gonna not get some calls that maybe you should have gotten just because you've tried, this trickeration on a nearly every play basis. So I have no sympathy. I have no sympathy for the chronic complainers nor the chronic floppers who don't even get the calls that maybe they should get.
Now, and I know I'm talking about the Defensive Player of the Year here, though, but do you think that's what happened last night when Clay had that wide-open three? It sure looked like he extended to shove Marcus Smart. He goes down on the floor, slides damn near to the paint from the three-point circle, and there's no call, and Clay jars an open shot. Did that happen last night, do you think?
I did not see the replay on that.
Okay.
So I didn't have it was right in front of us, so I was blocked from the view of the extension. But I've had a lot of people like yourself say it was clearly the extension of the arm. But I was privy to the timeout. Marcus Smart very respectfully and politely asked the official, about that play, and he said, "You flopped." And again, and this isn't a Marcus Smart issue, it's an NBA issue. I thought for a while the NBA had done a good job cleaning up the flopping. They started to fine. I haven't seen a fine of a flop in ages, and I think flopping again is making a huge comeback into the league. And I think our players are very intelligent. If it's not rewarded and it's punished, it will be eliminated. But if they can sucker officials into calls, they're going to do it. So I think it's really important that the NBA, particularly at this high level of basketball, you play basketball. You don't try to trick the officials.
Well, I guess, and then you can't blame Marcus Smart if he did ask that of the officials, and they're like, you flopped, and then he gets called for an offensive foul moments later when Jordan Poole wasn't even touched. I wouldn't blame him for losing his cool and something like that in that situation. And then, sometimes I'm just wondering when coaches use their challenges, sometimes there's challengeable moments in the second and third quarter and they hold it in their back pocket, right? I'm wondering what your 2 cents are on something like that, Jeff.
I never coached in the challenge era,
right?
But I think from what I've seen and talked to coaches about, they're going to use it on points scored that they can either get a bucket, and particularly maybe a 3-point, play, or they can take, points off. But I think a lot of guys like to try to hold it in case a star player later in the game gets a bad call, just sort of like what Steve Kerr tried to do with Draymond Green,
right,
preventing him from getting his 6th. I think they try to hold on to that. And I think, again, I think everybody would agree foul calls that don't lead to points should be reserved for the stars or high leverage situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most would agree if it involved points, even early in the game, you take it because you don't know if you're ever going to get to a late use of the challenge. You may not use it. I don't think Ime used his challenge last night. So there are varying thoughts, but I think it always involves stars and points.
Jeff Van Gundy here on the Rich Eisen Show. Before I let you go, Jeff, I made a mental note saying I've got to ask Jeff about this when I have him on tomorrow. I'm watching the end of the game. You just mentioned Draymond Green fouling out. And the graphic comes across the screen that Draymond Green's fouled out in 3 of 5 final games. Last player to have such a thing happen during the NBA Finals, it was Dale Davis of the 2000 Indiana Pacers. You mentioned that stat. Turning to Mark Jackson, I don't know if you did or not, but Mark had a big problem with it. You called those Pacers a dirty team. And
well, when you're coaching a team of choir boys like we were in New York at that time, you take offense when the big bad bullies of the block, the Indiana Pacers, are always pushing, shoving, grabbing, holding, and, like we followed the rules and we followed the spirit of the rules.
Yes,
and
sir.
Mark Jackson's Pacer team, they were nasty, and, we tried to be above that, but, sometimes we couldn't hold our tempers.
I got to tell you, Jeff, as a Knick fan, remembering those times, I was applauding from my front row seat last night when you said that. Laugh out loud.
The Davis brothers were overly physical, picking on Charles Oakley, and I didn't appreciate it. I didn't appreciate it.
I loved it. You doubled it when you said it, and then Mark Jackson had a problem with it. And then the fact that you doubled down by throwing Antonio Davis onto the table in the mix as well at the same time, I was laughing my ass off. That was great. Just great television.
Well, I'm glad I gave you some moments of levity, Rich, because I do remember those Pacer teams so fondly. Seriously, like just the Davises and Reggie and McKee, they competed so hard and were coached brilliantly by Larry Brown, and so it was good times.
Absolutely, and that because it does kind of dovetail into the conversation you hear, certainly on the family of networks at the Worldwide Leader, about different eras and whether the current era would get their asses handed to them by the aught. Pacers, and I'm wondering what do you think of that conversation, Jeff, as to whether the players today are it's a softer league in a way in the NBA right now, Jeff?
Well, first of all, I misspoke. I said Larry Brown. That was in the '94s. That was Larry Bird.
Yes, correct.
Myself.
Yes, sir.
Larry Legend. But I think this. I'm looking out, and TNT's doing a pregame show from right in front of where we broadcast before we go on.
Right.
And I see Isaiah Thomas, right? And Isaiah Thomas was like my first year in the NBA in, I think it was 89-90. We played the Knicks. Stu Jackson was the head coach. We played them in the second round of the playoffs after beating the Boston Celtics in a Game 5 deciding game at Boston Garden. And he was absolutely murder. He was so good. But the game was so physical. And remember, they had Dennis Rodman as their starting three, I believe, at that time.
Right.
They had no shooting on the floor. And the guy still got wherever he wanted. So you take a guy like Isaiah Thomas and you put him into the non-hand check era and the 5-out era and the amazing skill that our players have now, and you put shooting around him, I guarantee you he'd be, at his prime, a top 5 player now, right? So great players like Thomas, who are these great competitors, they could play anytime. But I really don't have a lot of, an appetite for comparing and contrasting eras. To me, comparison is the thief of joy, because whatever you say, someone is going to feel diminished. And I don't have that, necessity. But I know this, the best teams I ever coached or I ever was an assistant coach of, I believe could play in any era because they had versatility, they could score, they could guard, and they could adapt. And if you can adapt to different rules and different eras, like Patrick Ewing, he was dominant then, he'd be dominant now. You say how he's going to guard the pick and roll, I say you didn't watch him in his prime, because he could guard, he could contain Stockton, he could contain Isaiah to the extent that anybody could, some of the greatest point guards to ever play. So I think greatness can transcend eras, but I just don't have, it in me to try to diminish some era to prop up another.
Jeff, I always appreciate the time, and I'd love to have you back on one time, whether you're out here or not, just on the phone, just going down memory lane, just picking your brain on Riley, Pat, and the rest of those Knicks years and your Houston years and just the league in general. And I love listening to your brother, too. I don't know how the hell anybody ever got a word in edgewise around your dinner table growing up, but I just really enjoy all of the Van Gundys.
I'll tell you how that happened, Rich.
Yes.
We had to raise our hand and ask permission. You talk about a different era. That was the be seen but not heard era. Believe me.
I bet, man. Well, again, have a great time with Game 6, and truly, I'd love to have you back on maybe when things aren't so busy. So thanks for the call.
Okay.
Appreciate
Anytime.
it. Thank
Take
you.
care.
That's Jeff Van Gundy right here.